The moment the HOA president screamed, "He's trespassing," and dialed 911. My brother was just pulling a trout out of our lake with a proud grin and zero idea that 5 minutes later, police sirens, legal chaos, and a $4 million fallout would turn the neighborhood upside down. The day started like any other summer Saturday. The sky was clear, the sun was warm but not burning, and there was a soft breeze rippling through the tall pine trees that surrounded my property. My house sat peacefully on a few acres of land just outside the main entrance of Maple Creek Estate, a quiet neighborhood built around what used to be part of my grandfather's old property. Years ago, he sold off sections of the land to a development company, but he made sure to hold on to the part that mattered most to our family, the lake. It wasn't a huge body of water, but it was beautiful, tucked between the trees like a secret. It had always belonged to us. It was where I learned to fish, where my mom used to read books under the willow tree, and where my brother Liam and I would catch frogs as kids. We called it Clearwater Lake, though it had never been named on any official map. Liam had texted me the night before, coming by in the morning gonna fish, bringing sodas and snacks. That was it. No drama, no warning signs. Just a chill weekend plan between brothers. He showed up around 8 a.m. with his beat-up fishing rod in one hand and a blue cooler in the other. He looked exactly the same as always, tall, scruffy, and wearing that faded brown cap he'd had since college. I greeted him at the door with a mug of coffee and a laugh, still using that ancient rod. "Don't mock the classics," he grinned. "This thing's got magic." We walked down to the lake like we always did. Birds chirped above us, and dragonflies zipped across the surface of the water. It was peaceful in the kind of way that makes you forget about the world's nonsense. Liam cast his line, settled onto the old wooden bench we'd rebuilt last summer, and cracked open a soda. I sat on the grass nearby, sipping my coffee, watching the water sparkle. That peace didn't last long. I first heard the voice before I saw her, sharp, shrill, cutting through the trees like a knife. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" We both turned our heads in unison. Marching across the lawn, arms swinging like windmills, was none other than Michelle Hargrover, HOA president of Maple Creek Estates, a woman so tightly wound she made a violin string look relaxed. She was wearing her usual pale blue blazer, sunglasses perched on her head, and holding what looked like a leather-bound notepad. Liam blinked. "Fishing. This lake is private property," she shouted, coming closer. "You can't just waltz in here and fish." I stood up slowly, brushing grass off my jeans. "Michelle, good morning. This is private property. Mine." She pointed at Liam with the notepad. "He doesn't live here. He's trespassing." "Actually," I said calmly, "he's my brother. I invited him." "That doesn't matter," she snapped. "This lake falls under HOA oversight. Number fishing without permission from the board." Liam looked at me, puzzled. "Did the HOA take over your lake or something?" "No," I replied, just as confused. "They didn't." But Michelle was already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police. I've warned you. This is a violation of HOA environmental policy and community guidelines." "Wait," I said, stepping toward her, trying to keep things calm. "Michelle, seriously, let's not do this. The lake is not part of the HOA property. I have the original deed inside if you want to see it." She ignored me and started speaking loudly into her phone. "Yes, I'd like to report trespassing and unauthorized fishing on protected HOA land. Yes, right now, Maple Creek Estates, just by the east tree line. Yes, I'm the HOA president." Liam stood up, his fishing line still bobbing in the water. "Dude," he muttered, "is this really happening?" It was happening. The next 20 minutes were a blur of tension. Michelle stood at the edge of my yard like a statue, arms crossed, tapping her foot. Liam sat back down, muttering under his breath and sipping his soda. I ran inside to grab the deed folder, my heartbeat rising a little with each step. I had never had any real trouble with the HOA before. Sure, there were notices about lawn length and mailbox paint colors, but this felt like a whole new level by the time I came back out. I heard the distant wail of sirens. Patrol cars pulled up at the curb. Doors opened, officers stepped out. One male, one female. Both looked professional, calm but wary. "Morning," the male officer said, walking toward us. "We received a call about a possible trespass situation." Michelle stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Yes, thank goodness. He's the one," she said, jabbing a finger at Liam. "He's fishing illegally. This lake is HOA regulated. He doesn't live here. He's breaking the rules." The officers looked at each other, then at me. I held up the manila folder. "Officer, I'm the property owner. My name is Andrew Taylor. This lake is on my land, which was legally separated from the HOA's jurisdiction by my grandfather back in 1997. I have the full documentation right here." The female officer took the folder and began flipping through the papers. After a moment, she nodded. "These look official and accurate. So this is your private property?" "Yes, and your brother was invited here, correct?" Michelle cut in. "But the HOA environmental map shows this lake as part of the community. It's even on the brochure." I turned to her and tried to keep my voice steady. "You printed that map, Michelle. It doesn't change legal boundaries. The lake was never included in the HOA agreement. It was never signed over. It has always remained in my family's name. The male officer sighed. Ma'am, he said, addressing Michelle now. This isn't a criminal matter. It appears Mr. Taylor is well within his rights. There's no trespassing here. Michelle looked stunned. Her mouth opened, then closed again. So, you're not going to arrest him? No, ma'am. There's no reason to. We suggest you speak with your board about verifying jurisdiction before calling 911 for non-criminal issues in the future. And just like that, they left. I wish that had been the end of it. But Michelle didn't back off. Not even a little. The next day I got an envelope in the mailbox marked with the HOA seal. Inside was a fine $800 for unauthorized use of community resources. The day after that I got another $500 for non-compliance with HOA fishing policy. Then came the emails. Refusal to register guests, environmental disruption, excessive lawn wear from visitor foot traffic. She wasn't backing down. Liam offered to stay away, to keep things peaceful, but I told him absolutely not. That lake was ours, our history, our right. What Michelle didn't realize was that every letter she sent, every false claim she wrote down, every dollar she tried to take from me under false HOA authority was building a case, a real one, with legal consequences. And I had just the lawyer in mind to handle it. All because a grown man dared to cast a line into his family's lake, but she'd made one mistake too many. And now, it was our turn. The silence after the police left felt strange. There was no satisfaction, no celebrations, just this eerie stillness, like the moment right before a thunderstorm. Liam packed up his fishing rod slowly, not because he was in a hurry to leave, but because the whole scene had left him dazed. Man, he said as he clicked the reel into place. I was just trying to catch a base, not start a war. I forced a chuckle, but inside I knew this wasn't over. Michelle didn't back down from anything. She was the type of person who would spend hours combing through bylaws and clauses just to prove a point, even if she was dead wrong. Her pride was welded into her position as HOA president, and her belief that she had absolute power over the entire subdivision. In her mind, land she didn't own was going to lead her somewhere dangerous. That night, I sat at my desk in the den, flipping through the old deed my grandfather had left us. Every line had been verified years ago, signed off by the county clerk, and reaffirmed when I inherited the property. There was no mention of any shared ownership. The lake, the field around it, the dock, even the walking trail behind the trees, it was all mine. Still, I scanned every page like it was the first time I'd seen it. I took photos, I scanned them into PDFs. I even called the county records office the next morning and requested a certified copy, just to be absolutely sure. Meanwhile, Michelle was getting bolder. The fines didn't stop. On Monday, I received another envelope, this time citing refusal to comply with HOA mediation request. I never got any request. Tuesday, she posted a bright orange notice on the edge of my driveway, facing the street, with HOA violation under review written in block letters. Then came the rumors. Liam called me that afternoon. You're not gonna like this, he said. I just saw a post in the neighborhood Facebook group, Michelle's, saying you're refusing to follow community fishing rules and you threatened HOA volunteers with legal action. I rubbed my temples. Threatened. I gave the cops a deed. She also said you're being investigated for environmental damage to community property. She's lost it, I muttered. No, he said. She's lost control. And she's trying to take it back. That hit me hard. It wasn't just about me fishing or Liam or the lake. It was about her control. HOA presidents like Michelle didn't operate in gray areas. They lived for power, for feeling like the boss of something, even if that something was a mailbox color or how long someone's grass was. And now that I'd proven she didn't own the lake, her ego had been bruised publicly right in front of 2 officers. The next evening, I sat down with my friend and attorney Darren Whitaker. He was calm, sharp, and had a long history of dealing with HOA disputes for homeowners who got caught in the crosshairs of petty tyranny. We met at his office, a small brick building near downtown, with quiet lighting and a wall full of law books that looked like they'd actually been read. He read the stack of fines I brought in. Each one was printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Michelle, and stacked with citations to imaginary rules. She's really reaching here, Darren said, flipping through the papers. You're not even part of this HOA. I know she's which issued financial penalties without authority. Publicly posted a notice suggesting you're in violation of neighborhood policy. Sent mail to your address accusing you of legal violations, and now she's spreading misinformation online.
Yep.
She's opened herself up to a major defamation suit. I nodded slowly. That's what I was hoping to hear. But let's not start there, Darren said, leaning back. We start simple. We send a cease and desist. We demand a full retraction of all fines, and we put her on notice. If she continues, then we file. Not just defamation, harassment, civil liability, fraudulent lien threats if she tries that again. What about involving the HOA board? We will, but remember, people like her usually keep the board in the dark or too scared to oppose her. Once we bring the law into the conversation, you'll see them shift. That night, the first letter went out. Formal, professional, and sharp. It demanded the immediate withdrawal of all violations issued to my address and a written apology from the HOA president for harassment and defamation. We gave them 5 business days to respond. On day 2, Michelle doubled down. I woke up to see a car parked outside my property with a man taking photos of the lake. Not a casual passer, had a clipboard, a measuring stick, and a camera with a long lens. I walked out calmly. "Can I help you?" He looked surprised but didn't seem ashamed. "I'm conducting an environmental review on behalf of the HOA routine inspection on my land." He paused. "The HOA map lists this as shared wetland." I smiled. "That map is wrong and this inspection is unauthorized. Leave now or I'll call the sheriff." He packed up quickly and drove off. But I had photos of him, his plate, and a recording of our conversation. More evidence. By day 4, Michelle finally responded to Darren's letter, but not with an apology. Instead, her reply claimed that the HOA had received conflicting reports about the lake's ownership and that she was within her rights to investigate. Darren didn't even blink. "She's digging her own grave," he said. "We'll file next week, and we'll win." But something changed on day 5. That's when neighbors started reaching out. A woman named Karen, really messaged me on Facebook. "Hey, I heard what happened. She fined me $250 last month for having a bench near the sidewalk. Can I talk to your lawyer?" Then came Greg, from 2 streets over. "She reported my camper even though it was parked for less than 24 hours. It cost me $1,000 in fees." By the end of the weekend, over 14 people had reached out, each with their own HOA horror story, all involving Michelle. Darren and I met again on Monday. "This," he said, holding up a folder full of new complaints, "just became a class action opportunity." I sat back, stunned. "From fishing to federal court." Exactly. "And you'll be the lead plaintiff. The original complaint will include defamation, harassment, and abuse of power. But now we're adding fraudulent fines, coercion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's going to get big." I looked out his office window at the traffic rolling by. I thought about Liam, still frustrated but refusing to let this nonsense stop him from doing something as simple and innocent as casting a line. I thought about my grandfather, how hard he'd worked to preserve this place for us, and I thought about Michelle, whose blind pursuit of power had led her to make one bad call after another, all because she couldn't stand being told. No, this wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about what happens when someone thinks they're above the land, what happens when the people they step on finally push back. Michelle had thrown the first stone, but the ripples were turning into waves, and soon the whole HOA was about to feel the storm. The lawsuit was filed on a gray Thursday morning. There was no press release, no big announcement, just a clean, stapled stack of papers submitted to the county courthouse by Darren, calmly and efficiently. Within that stack was everything: property deeds, letters, photos, screenshots of social media slander, records of false fines, and over a dozen sworn statements from neighbors who had suffered similar bullying at the hands of Michelle Hargrove and her HOA board. By the end of the day, word had spread. The moment Michelle got served, the entire tone of the neighborhood shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one handing out notices, she was receiving one. And this time, the notice wasn't from her neatly printed HOA policy committee. It was from the civil division of the local court, ordering her to respond to multiple charges within 14 days or face default judgment. The next morning, I noticed something unusual as I walked out to get the mail. Michelle's signature community update bulletin was missing from the HOA board near the entrance to Maple Creek Estates. For years, she'd updated it, weekly quotes about order, unity, and standards, followed by new rules, warnings, and passive-aggressive motivational tips. But now, it was just blank. Later that day, a knock came at my door. It was Paul Granger, one of the board members, a retired military guy with a quiet demeanor and a fondness for bird watching. I invited him in, offered him a glass of water, and we sat at the kitchen table like 2 men who'd been through a storm and hadn't even dried off yet. "She never told us," Paul began, shaking his head slowly, "about the lake, the police call, the lawsuit, none of it. We found out through whispers and neighbors asking questions." "I figured," I replied. "She acts alone, always has. She said you were aggressive, that you threatened to sue just because she asked your brother to leave. I handed police a deed and asked her to stop harassing us." He nodded. "And now you've got half the neighborhood backing you. I've never seen this before. Michelle has always ruled with fear, but now she looks lost. She's crossed too many lines, Paul. This isn't personal revenge. This is correction." Paul sighed and looked down at his hands. "I'm stepping down next week. I've had enough of all this." It was a strange moment seeing the cracks forming in the little empire Michelle had built, and they weren't just cracks. They were beginning to split the entire foundation. The next few days were oddly quiet. No new fines, no patrol cars creeping down my lane, no flyers taped to my door. It was like the neighborhood had taken a breath and was holding it. Then, On Monday morning, someone sent me a screenshot from the Maple Creek Estates private Facebook group. Michelle had posted a long message titled, "Setting the Record Straight." In it, she claimed the lawsuit was baseless, that I was manipulating public opinion, and that my brother had violated sensitive ecological zones around a protected HOA water feature. She signed off by calling herself a guardian of community values and warning everyone not to be swayed by drama and misinformation. Underneath the post, comments exploded. Greg M. Michelle, the lake isn't even part of the HOA. Stop lying. Carla W. Why are you still talking? You called the cops on someone fishing. Andrew T. Please refer to the lawsuit for full documentation. It speaks for itself. Linda P. You fined me $500 for having a holiday wreath. I want that money back. That thread spiraled fast, and by noon, it was deleted. But the damage was done. The more Michelle fought to defend herself, the more she revealed the truth about how out of control she'd become. And now, the court's timeline was ticking. Darren called me later that day. Her attorney responded. He said, "They're asking for a mediation meeting before the first court hearing." Does that mean she's scared? It means she knows she can't win this cleanly, but it could be a trap to limit exposure. You're under no obligation to settle early. I don't want to settle, I said firmly. She lied, she fined, she slandered, she escalated. She needs to face that. Then we proceed, but prepare yourself. Once we go to court, it becomes public. I was ready. At least I thought. I was that weekend. Local media picked up the story. A small article appeared in the community newspaper. Lawsuit filed against Maple Creek HOA over alleged harassment and property disputes. It didn't name Michelle directly, but anyone familiar with the neighborhood knew who it was about. The article summarized the police incident, the ongoing lawsuit, and the claims from several residents who said the HOA had fined them unfairly. For years. Within hours, my inbox was full again, this time from reporters, legal blogs, and residents from other neighborhoods. People wanted to know how we were doing it, how we were fighting back. One email stood out. "Thank you for standing up. Our HOA president once fined me for planting a tree in memory of my wife. I didn't have the strength to push back. You give me hope." Alan M. Lakeside Heights. That hit hard. I printed it and pinned it to the bulletin board above my desk. Meanwhile, Michelle's world was shrinking. I heard from a former board member, Ellie, who told me she'd quietly resigned and was preparing a statement of her own. I was scared of her too, she admitted, but not anymore. She went too far. Darren was gathering all of this. Each voice added weight to the case. By the time we were 2 weeks out from the court date, we had 19 people willing to testify against the HOA's practices under Michelle's leadership. And then, it happened. On a rainy Thursday morning, a black SUV pulled up to my property gate. I watched from the porch as a woman stepped out holding a large envelope. She wore a gray raincoat and carried herself like she meant business. She approached slowly, carefully, as if unsure how I'd react. "Mr. Taylor?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Vanessa Cole. I represent the Maple Creek HOA board. I've been asked to deliver a formal notice." She handed me the envelope, nodded politely, and walked away without saying another word. Inside the envelope were 2 letters. The first was brief. "Michelle Hargrove has officially resigned as HOA president effective immediately." The second was longer. A formal apology from the board. It acknowledged that the lake was indeed outside HOA jurisdiction, that the fines issued to my address were without merit, and that all penalties would be voided and formally retracted. The board also promised to begin a full review of HOA governance policies to prevent similar abuse in the future. But there was no apology from Michelle. She had vanished. Vanished from the Facebook group, from the board meetings, from the neighborhood, as far as anyone could tell. Her house sat dark for days, blinds drawn. A "for sale by owner" sign appeared on her lawn the following week. It wasn't enough. Not for me. Not for Liam. Not for the neighbors who'd been wronged, but it was a start. Darren called me that evening. "This changes the tone of the case," he said. "We now have a full board acknowledgement, but it doesn't clear her personally. We're still suing Michelle directly. I want her held accountable," I said, "for everything. And she will be," he promised. "The crown she wore so proudly. It's cracked now, and the people she ruled over there not afraid anymore." As the call ended, I walked down to the lake. The water was calm, soft ripples spreading from the center. The bench where Liam sat that day was still there, though slightly wet from the morning rain. I sat down and looked out over the water, thinking about how a single caster, simple act of peace had turned into a battle for truth, for fairness, for freedom from the grip of a petty tyrant. The storm wasn't over, but the skies were beginning to clear. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not in temperature though, the AC was definitely running a little too strong, but in atmosphere. The halls were wide, the walls tall and pale, and everyone who passed seemed to be in some kind of quiet rush. It had been 2 months since the police were called on my brother Liam for fishing in our lake. 2 months since Michelle Hargrove, the former HOA president, had accused us of violating imaginary rules, levied fines with no legal standing, and pushed us into a storm we hadn't asked for. And now, here we were, seated outside courtroom 3B, waiting for the civil hearing to begin. Darren sat next to me, calm and confident. His briefcase was perfectly organized and his notes were already tabbed and color-coded. Across the hallway, Michelle arrived with her attorney, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s who carried herself with the air of someone used to winning battles on technicalities. Michelle, however, looked different. The usual crisp blazer and confident stride were gone. She was thinner, paler. There was no clipboard in her hand, no sunglasses perched on her head, just a file folder clutched tightly to her chest like it was the last thing keeping her upright. The court clerk called our case, and we filed in. The judge, a middle-aged man with gray streaks in his short hair and tired but kind eyes, welcomed both sides and set the tone clearly. Respectful, professional, and focused on facts. This was a civil matter, not a circus. Darren had warned me: no drama, no outbursts, no speeches. Let the facts speak, and speak they did. Darren started with the deed, the original notarized property line map that clearly excluded the lake from HOA jurisdiction. He walked the court through how the HOA was formed years after my grandfather had already sectioned off our property and how no portion of our land had ever been submitted to HOA governance. Then came the photos: Michelle standing at the edge of my lake, pointing at my brother, calling the police, the officers responding, the falsified violation letters, the screenshots of her online defamation, calling me a threat to the neighborhood, and spreading rumors about dangerous guests and illegal fishing practices. When it was Michelle's attorney's turn, her defense was shaky at best. She argued that Michelle had operated under a reasonable belief that the lake was HOA property based on internal maps and prior informal usage. She claimed that the police were called out of concern for environmental policy and that the violation notices were issued in error but not with malice. Darren didn't need to say much after that. He simply played the recording of Michelle speaking to the HOA inspector she sent to my yard, the one where she explicitly says, "I don't care what the deed says, that lake looks like community property to me." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. Michelle's attorney quietly sank back into her seat. Then it was time for witness testimony. Greg took the stand first. He described how Michelle had fined him $1,000 for a camper that was parked in his own driveway for less than a day. She threatened to tow it, he said. But when I called the county, they said she didn't have that authority. She sent another fine anyway. Next was Ellie, the former board member. She told the court how Michelle would often hold private meetings and make decisions without board approval. Most of us were just scared of her, she admitted. If we disagreed, she'd turn on us. One time she accused me of violating fence color rules just because I questioned a landscaping bill. And then came Liam. He stepped up calm and collected in his jeans and plaid shirt and spoke plainly. "I just wanted to fish with my brother. I grew up on that lake. We used to skip rocks and watch the stars out there. And suddenly there were police officers treating me like a criminal because someone didn't like what she saw from her window." When it was over, the judge took a long pause before speaking. "I've seen many cases involving homeowners associations," he said, slowly, looking at both sides. "They often begin with misunderstandings, but this is not that. What we have here is a pattern of targeted harassment, misuse of power, and a willful ignorance of legal property boundaries." Michelle didn't look up. The judge continued. "That court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The HOA will pay restitution for the full amount of false fines, with an additional $150,000 in damages for reputational harm and legal expenses. In addition, Ms. Hargrove, acting in a personal capacity beyond her scope of authority, is liable for defamation and personal harassment, with an individual judgment of $350,000. I sat there, stunned, not because we one-eyed expected that, but because of the weight of the number, $500,000. And that was just our case. The class action suit, which was still being processed separately, would deal with the other residents' complaints. Michelle finally looked up. Her face was pale, her lips trembling slightly. But she didn't speak. She just stood when the judge dismissed us and walked quietly out of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. No outburst, no speech, just silence outside. The courthouse, a small group of neighbors had gathered. A few clapped quietly when they saw us. Greg shook my hand. Ellie gave me a hug. Someone brought coffee. I wasn't sure how to react to the attention, but Darren smiled at me and said, "You did something good here." On the way home, I thought a lot about Michelle, about how power can twist people. She hadn't started out this way, I'm sure. Maybe she once genuinely cared about keeping the neighborhood clean, organized, safe. But somewhere along the way she started mistaking control for leadership. And when that control was challenged, she didn't adjust. She attacked, and it cost her everything. Later that evening, Liam stopped by with a bottle of ginger ale and a bag of pretzels. We sat on the dock overlooking the lake, the sky turning gold and purple. The water was calm again, peaceful. "You know," he said, taking a sip, "I almost didn't come fish that day." I looked over. Why not? I'd had a long week. Wasn't sure I felt like it. But then I remembered how much Grandpa used to love this place, and I figured even 10 minutes by the water would make the week feel better. I smiled. That 10 minutes started a revolution. Guess so. He paused, then added, was it worth it? I thought about everything, the fines, the insults, the legal bills, the stress, and then I looked at the lake, at the reflection of the trees, the sounds of birds settling in, and the small ripples made by a fish surfacing somewhere in the distance. Yeah, I said. It was. We sat in silence for a while after that. No need for more words. Sometimes the piece speaks for itself, but I knew it wasn't over just yet. There was still the class action suit, still changes to be made in the HOA's structure, still neighbors who deserved answers and accountability. But the tide had turned. The truth had spoken, and it had echoed all the way through a courtroom. The next chapter would come soon. But for now, we sat by our lake. Where it all began. 3 weeks after the court ruling, the for sale sign vanished from Michelle Hargrove's yard. Her house sat quiet for days, blinds drawn, no car in the driveway. Word spread that she'd moved out of state, quietly, without goodbyes, without explanation. Her exit was as sudden as her rise to power had once been. And with her gone, the silence that followed wasn't just absence, it was relief. Like someone had finally shut off a pressure valve. The entire neighborhood had been holding its breath, around for years. But while Michelle left Maple Creek Estates behind, the consequences of her reign still echoed across the neighborhood like the ripples from a stone tossed in still water. The HOA board, shaken by the lawsuit and public fallout, held a special emergency meeting. For the first time in years, it was open to all residents. No RSVP, no backdoor rules, no last-minute changes to the agenda. Folding chairs filled the clubhouse hall. People stood against the walls and sat on windowsills just to hear what would be said. I wasn't planning to speak. I was still tired from the whole ordeal, but Darren urged me to go. You started this, he reminded me. You gave them the courage to stand up. Might as well see it through. The room quieted when I walked in. It was surreal. The same neighbors who once looked the other way when Michelle flexed her power now smiled and nodded. Some clapped, others just mouthed a quiet thank you as I passed. Paul Granger, the retired military board member who had visited me weeks earlier, stood at the front with a microphone. He looked more alive than I'd ever seen him. We're here today, he began, because something broke in this community, and thanks to one neighbor's courage to challenge what wasn't right, we're going to fix it. The board announced a complete overhaul of the HOA charter. No more arbitrary fines without due process. No more secret decisions by a single president. Every rule and regulation would now require full board approval and majority resident vote. An independent oversight committee was also created. 3 residents, unaffiliated with the board, whose job was to monitor all actions and handle complaints. One of the first rules passed: no HOA enforcement beyond officially recognized property lines. That meant no more pretending my lake was anything but mine. When they opened the floor for comments, I stood, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted closure. I never wanted this fight, I said, voice steady. All my brother and I wanted was a quiet morning by the water. But that morning exposed something deeper. Something that had been building for years. We weren't the only ones hurt by Michelle's leadership. But now, we have a chance to make things right, not just on paper, but in the way we treat each other. That's the community I want to be part of. One that respects boundaries and people. Applause followed, long and genuine. After the meeting, people lined up to talk. Some shared stories of how they'd quietly suffered under Michelle's control, fined for flower beds, harassed for fence heights, humiliated in public posts. Others asked if they could still join the class action lawsuit, which was steadily building strength. With over 25 residents now signed on, Darren said we were looking at one of the most significant civil HOA cases the state had seen in years. Meanwhile, my own court victory was already reshaping the local legal scene. Law firms began offering free consultations for HOA abuse cases. News outlets picked up the story again. A podcast even invited me to speak about grassroots legal action against overreaching local power structures. I declined. I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted my peace back. And slowly I got it. Liam came by more often, not just to fish but to hang out. We rebuilt the old dock together, adding 2 extra benches and a small fire pit nearby. If you're going to start a revolution, he joked, might as well have somewhere to sit afterward. We had neighbors over, sometimes people who had once avoided eye contact, now bringing casseroles and asking to help. One man, Victor from the next street over, brought his son to the lake one Saturday and asked, sheepishly, would it be all right if he tries fishing? He's never done it before. Of course, I said. Just tell him to throw the little ones back. That moment hit me hard. The lake, once a symbol of tension and conflict, was becoming what it had always meant to be, shared, not by forced regulation but by invitation and kindness. That mattered more than any courtroom win. The class action suit proceeded slowly, as those cases tend to. Darren handled it like a master chess player, patient and precise. The damages sought totaled nearly $4 million by the time the last affidavits came in. Most of it was aimed at the HOA's insurance policy, not individual board members though. Michelle, named personally, still bore the brunt of responsibility. We knew it would take months, maybe a year, But the outcome no longer felt like a question of if. It was a matter of when. One evening, well after sunset, I sat by the lake alone. The water was still, the stars just beginning to appear overhead. I thought about my grandfather, how proud he would have been. How he'd always said, land means nothing if you don't know what's worth standing on it for. He was right. I had stood for truth, for boundaries, for decency, and the ground I stood on had never felt steadier. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Liam, carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa and wearing that beat-up fishing cap of his. "You thinking about Grandpa again?" he asked, handing me a cup. "Yeah," I said. "And about how it all started." He sat beside me, sipping slowly. One fishing rod, one angry HOA lady, one police call who knew it would blow up like that. I laughed. Honestly, I didn't think they'd believed her at all. I never imagined we'd be in court, let alone win. "You didn't just win," he said. "You changed everything." I looked around. Fireflies blinked in the bushes. The wind rustled gently through the trees. The lake shimmered beneath the moonlight. "You know," Liam continued, "this place, it feels different now. Lighter, like it can breathe." I nodded. "So can we." A long silence followed, comfortable, warm. Then he added, "So, you wanna fish?" I chuckled, setting down my cocoa. "Yeah, let's fish." As we cast our lines into the dark water, I felt something close inside me. Not just the legal chapter, but the personal one. The fear, the tension, the uncertainty, it had lifted. What remained was family, truth, and the kind of peace that doesn't come from silence but from having spoken up. The HOA would never be the same again. The neighbors weren't the same, and I wasn't either. The lake was still ours. Always had been, but now we'd earned the right to enjoy it without apology. If you enjoyed this powerful story, don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Bright Reality for more eye-opening true stories every week.